Hello everyone, this is a video about the theory and the methodology and the philosophy, kind of, to do with history. And it'll take the form of a discussion of 5 books that I have right here that begins with Teach Yourself History. So, the first book, which I bought a while ago now, is this one. And this was, as you can see, The Use of History, was published in 1946. And then other books, we go on to this one. And this is the sort of, I think, the most famous one that is to this. This was published in 1961, and I believe this appears on university reading lists and is used in tutorials and for assignments and so forth in universities from America, England, and Australia, as far as I know, to this day. So that is kind of an important book. But also, we're looking at the Oxford Very Short History, the Oxford Very Short Introduction to History, and this is published in the year 2000. We'll then go on to also a book that is often referred to and provided to students at university, as far as I know, in my limited experience of it. This is Richard J. Evans, Professor of History at Cambridge University, in defense of history. But also, perhaps a lesser known one, at least in Europe, is what's their names? Appleby, Hunt, and Jacob. All professors, and this is basically an American work. And obviously it's telling the truth about history, which ought to be a fairly good idea and not overly controversial. But we shall see. So, there they are. With reference to the heading or the name of this particular video, Steve Donoghue, The Potential End of Education. God forbid. No more reading? Gotcha. And a professorial attack on the USA itself. God forbid. So anyway, Steve Donoghue, bless him, did once say in very stark and plain terms in a video 2 to 3 years ago maybe, don't read philosophy. That's what he said. Just don't do it. Don't read philosophy. And that line has remained with me ever since, over a few years now. Certainly, at the time, it seemed like a pretty startling statement. And which begs the question, naturally enough, for why? Well, by way of some kind of attack point to that particular question, I have a quote. One God, one law, one element, and one far-off divine event. Or, as Henry Adams once said about a generally imagined quest, not for the Holy Grail, but for some great generalization, which would finish one's clamour to be educated. Adams is presumably referring to historicism and the possible laws of history. Of course, mankind is perfectly capable of irrationality and for accident in history to dictate the course of events. Henry James' quote was apparently reading, however, by 1961 like old-fashioned jokes according to E.H. Carr. Perhaps I shouldn't have said however. But interestingly enough, the widely read Karl Popper apparently emptied the term historicism of any precise meaning. That is, something that makes a certain amount of sense to me. It is a term I've grappled with a little bit. And alas, the question appears to remain as to whether there is any kind of consensus in our current time. To take this point on a wee journey, therefore, apparently the following quote is also now an old-fashioned view of things. But I ask you, is it? Quote, the English Whig historians attributed the rise of British power and prosperity to the development of political institutions embodying the principles of constitutional liberty, close quotes. And yet, my no doubt limited but specialised reading of 17th century men petitioning the government for permission, of all things, to trade overseas and so forth, the emotive and lucid descriptions of the same, perhaps draws our perception, like gravity, to the glorious revolution of 1688-9, and that this is a pivotal moment for liberty in the world. All else of human endeavour, innovation and enterprise may follow as surely as day follows night. Perhaps it is not surprising to find that an Englishman invented the World Wide Web, if I may say so, the present day internet and many other things across all these years also. But of course, the gentle competition that has occupied minds across the entire Western world in peacetime can be observed and admired from Boston to Berlin and to Biarritz. Arguably, England has been far too radical since World War II, at least according to an Italian in recent years talking to one David Gilmour, which again, Mr. Steve Donoghue may well recall from, or maybe not, from one of his library tours. Anyway, there is multiplication in history, but also simplification. An earlier video of mine mentions this issue. Leslie Paul, apparently in his book, The Annihilation of Man, said that there is a, quote, logical and irrational quilt of knowledge. And that was from the Second War. Modern man is to an unprecedented degree self-conscious and therefore conscious of history. And that's from Mr. Edward Hallett Carr, or E.H. Carr. If you're still listening, then I'm pleased to be able to say I've reserved the following segment as such for all good people with a similar interest. This is the book haul segment, but it's also the discussion segment of the 5 books as mentioned. Okay, so the key volume from the Teach Yourself History series seemed like a logical start point in an exploration of the subject, for me at least, which might well work perfectly well adhering to the Historathon framework, such as it is in 2025. I have kind of got hooked, or I did kind of get hooked in mid-2023. This July, I have not, strictly speaking, followed the assignment parameters of Q3, but that is all to the good. The use of history and the Oxford Very Short Introduction and What is History are books that I have covered in July so far. So, in the use of history, Rouse talks about the usual things in a way: objectivity, art or science, historicism, theories, and generalization. There is a little history of the writing of history, and at the end, literally, a reading course, which recommends books for each section. He starts, however, as such. Yes, let me find it. And this you might find slightly unusual. You might think that in order to learn history, you need a library of books to begin with. But not at all. Nope. That only comes at the end. What you need at the beginning is a pair of stout walking shoes, a pencil and a notebook, perhaps a good county guide, a covering or a state guide, covering the area you mean to explore. Now, maybe a county guide, in fact. Yeah. He stipulates 3 golden rules that, as he says, it seems to me, that number 1 is keep your eyes open. Number 2, take notes. And number 3, read the right books. Which kind of sort of brings us a full circle to BookTube, as far as I'm concerned. All sorts of people have recommended all sorts of books in passing, literally in passing, that they happen to be reading. And I have found it an amazing and an amazing thing to have got involved with. And all sorts of books have indeed suddenly been written down and whacked into search boxes and so forth over the last 2 or 3 years. Yeah, the only downside is the cost. But hey, it's all good living, hopefully. I mean, consumerism is rather shallow and not likely to lead to much in the way of depth of joy, but nonetheless, it's a journey in itself. But I digress somewhat. Yeah. On page 237. And I might say I do absolutely recommend this this particular book. Yeah. At the beginning, the reader needs someone to warn him as to the particular bias and prejudices of a given writer. It could be an issue for BookTube generally, and perhaps Historathon as well. Yeah, I mean, I wonder. Okay, so yeah, usual thing. It is 122 3 pages. That's it. In this book, John Arnold talks about the line, the quote, about how the past is a foreign country. And I kind of wondered about this, and it doesn't seem quite right to me, or it didn't seem quite right, almost by instinct. So I looked into it, and the quote is from some novelist from the 20th century called L.P. Hartley, an Englishman, and it specifically is the opening line to his 1953 novel, The Go-Between. The full quote is, "The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there." So, actually having a look at that actual book, early on in chapter 7, Harley also compares Wiltshire Stooks to the Norfolk version of Stooks that had, and I quote, "a slightly different outline from our Wiltshire ones, and confirmed me in my sense of being abroad." Well, there we are. If that's not a case of taking things out of context, I don't know what is. But there is more. Philip Larkin's 1947 book, A Girl in Winter, has in chapter 1 the line that England is a foreign country to suggest the alien nature of its post-war self. One has to wonder whether or not Mr. L.P. Hartley was aware of Larkin's book from 6 years before. On that theme, to come just swiftly back to Rouse, and this guy is, just to confirm, he is a fellow of All Souls, Oxford, at the time. Okay, so he says that people who do not know their history are liable to be fooled. He talks about those national generalizations that used to be knocking around. The Americans are like this, the Germans are like that, the English are such and such or others, whatever it is. And he talks about the continental view, amazingly enough, of the English, as if, I don't know, the French and the Dutch and the Danish people all have a similar view of the English. Well, what he says, Rouse makes the point that they had a tendency to see us, that is the English, as, quote, the most indisciplined of peoples. And it was a great mistake on the part of the dictators. It was a great mistake on the part of the dictators to think that the mood of appeasement betokened the decadence of the English people. Underneath there were the old long-tried qualities, patient and strong, held in restraint. But still there under the surface was the old truculence that had refused to yield to so many tyrants and seen them out. And furthermore, in the end, a false historical tradition is a terrible source of weakness and intellectual disarray. Even though in the short run it promises to give a people greater cohesion and pride in their past, nations can be overstimulated. These may be old wise words, too easily ignored. And to confirm, I'm not saying that America is a candidate for this category. Ever since W started saying publicly that America is the greatest country on earth. But it would not surprise if it turns out an issue in some way, sometime in the future. Moving over to John Arnold's The Oxford very short introduction. John Arnold is fairly well qualified for this. He is a professor of history at the UEA, that's the University of East Anglia in England. He also mentions about the past being a foreign country, but for him, he includes a quote from Douglas Adams, the sci-fi writer. Quote, "The past is truly a foreign country. They do things just like us." Oh yeah. And he does have some insights in the book, and he says some very neat kind of professorial things. But it seems to me a little pedestrian, a little too keen to represent different theories without much in the way of analysis, except to fully represent each philosophy. He seems to be trying to please everyone, and those people who follow British politics in some way may equate that with the Theresa May administration. She did this in her term of office, and also perhaps, or she ended up pleasing no one, and perhaps that is what John Arnold does in this book. Yeah. Moving on to the car, however, E.H. Carr, as he's normally referred to as. Okay, yeah, this is a heck of a book. The previous one starts well, and I was really enjoying it for about, I don't know, a third, a half, maybe more, but it kind of sort of, yeah. Basically what I kind of just said. But anyway, moving on. This book by Carr, What is History, from 1961. What to say about this? Well, history is, well, it might be common sense, shall we say, or it might be subjective, probably politically. And it is surely a working model, history that is. And history is about facts, selection, and judgment. It might have something to do with philosophy, and might be a science, or in fact an art, or both, depending on your version of common sense, probably. It is to do with power and economics, and morality, and words, and numbers, and liberty, and dictators, and causes, and even accident, if you will allow. But it is certainly, and thankfully, very much to do with time and an interest in the past, in the story of the human race, of who and what we are, from one context to the next, in a seemingly endless microcosm of individual experience, but also macrocosm of perspective that might even include the future. Well, that is at least my reckoning in a kind of a wireless form, shall we say. From the back cover, Isaiah Berlin, or Sir Isaiah Berlin, to give his Berlin, says something. Says the following, writing in the New Statesman, peculiarly enough. This is an admirably stimulating and intrepid book, a bold excursion into a region of central importance, where most contemporary philosophers and historians unaccountably either fear or disdain to tread. But I mention Isaiah Berlin not only for the review, but also he's coming up in a little while. Yeah. Okay, so we'll get back to that. In the meantime, there is also the very well-known In Defense of History by Richard J. Evans. Interestingly enough, there is an edition, or rather the first edition of this book was from 1997. This one is a 2000 edition, and the difference is there is a 60-page afterword added to the 2000 edition. So there we have it. And I think it's, if I remember rightly, a good read as well, a good edition. So could be worth it. So what about this one? Well, there are the usual chapters similar to the other books and other books that exist. Science, morality, facts, objectivity, and also causation. And here is an issue to reckon with. We can compare or perhaps contrast causation in history, since it also features prominently in the car. On page 1 of the chapter in this book, Evans states that Carr pours scorn on Sir Isaiah Berlin. Apparently, Carr said that Berlin favoured the idea of individual action and accident over and above the larger impersonal cause, something which I have a certain amount of sympathy for. But regardless, we are apparently caught up in the zeitgeist of our own age, and that events are happening that we are not quite entirely in control of, or things are just beyond the control of members of the leadership of a country. No doubt much to their chagrin. That perhaps all of us might adapt ourselves to a new reality. Yeah. Anyhow, I think Carr is being just like E.H. Carr in a way, and that he is also entirely polite about and towards Isaiah Berlin. He says Berlin talks nonsense. Yep, but he's really very generous about it. It might even be inspiring, perchance. But I digress. In everyday life, people do not proceed on what Evans calls such extreme assumptions. And of course, it is an extreme idea to deny human free will an accident in any story or historical event. Of course, accident and contingency are a stark reality for both Carr and Evans. Carr and Evans both talk about a sense of moral responsibility. Carr puts it very well when he says that normal adult human beings are morally responsible for their personalities. And Evans, that there is nothing less true than the dictum, quote, to understand everything is to excuse everything. Again, both Carr and Evans say that cause and moral responsibility are different categories. The violent chap who insists on a duel even when the other party has offered a sincere and normally conventional apology and kills the other party in the duel is charged with murder. So we think we understand the cause of the event, and that the more violent protagonist is morally responsible for his personality and consequent actions, for he is standing trial for murder. And we are a witness to these events in the proverbial public gallery, and in the creation and subsequent writing up of books of history, and in the reading of those same history books. A few pages later, Professor Evans talks about this book. Appleby, Hunt and Jacob, with respect to the causation puzzle concerning Mr. Jones and Robinson. A kind of, if you're not aware, a kind of like a philosophical dilemma thing, like the train carriage out of control coming down the line, and there's some people on one part of the track, and there's one guy on a siding or something, that kind of thing. But apparently, in my reading of this excellent book, they merely make the point that, quote, inferential evidence of invisible structures and patterns abounds. That is, in history. The Cold War or the French Revolution has what they call fraught perplexities. Fair enough, you might say. They are well beyond any specific and much less complex, much simpler example, such as the Jones and Robinson dilemma or causation puzzle. Their point doesn't seem to me to have very much directly to do with political correctness, which is what Evans accuses them of, and it doesn't, and that it's what they say that has a certain Americanness. Apparently, must somehow make their version or their discussion about it irrelevant. They would have appeared to have been therefore thrown under the bus just after Robinson was run over. Perhaps Mr. Jones was driving a bus after all. But there we are. That kind of ties in those two, and that one. No. Can I advise which one? No, not a chance. I think they're important in their own way, and highly readable in their own way, and very accessible in their own way, and they cover similar material and also have their own area of interest, shall we say, similar to these two. So yeah, some past reading and some recent reading for Historathon. Theory, methodology, perhaps a better thing to say, and philosophy, or is it the end of education? and we just need to throw them out the window or something like that. Perhaps that's the ambition for some, but I'm, shall we say, in the words of Henry Fonda in the film 12 Angry Men, I'm not convinced. So, yeah, I have more to talk about in this line if I manage to get to it. I did read The Houses of History, I recommend, from Donoghue Books. I bought this recently, but I haven't had time to get to it. And I intend to read Geoffrey Elton's The Practice of History as well. So hopefully I will have some kind of survey of those sometime in the future, maybe this year. So yeah, there they are. I hope you found that useful, perhaps, and certainly meaningful, and worth thinking over. And maybe if you've got any comments, please leave them in the comment section. And well, happy reading, and bye for now.